just start. I'm sure you've heard this, but let me just give you some names, and I'll not even wait for the answer, but what does this remind you of? Trump, Erdogan, Modi, Brexit, Duterte, I don't know if that's the right pronunciation, Putin. This is what we're seeing around the world. What you're seeing is authoritarian regimes across the world. And unfortunately, India was ahead of many of the other countries in setting up a authoritarian government. So that's really the context in which we are working. So I wanted to urge all of us, I'm giving you these names, that very often we work in development. We end up kind of zooming in to the questions of development and often leave out the politics and the context in which we work. So the entire work we are doing, as in this fantastic conversation that's been created for all of us here, is obviously working in a particular environment. And that environment, unfortunately, is global. And that's the global trend of authoritarian regimes, of authoritarian leaders, interestingly using means of democracy to subvert democracy. So they get elected, and they are then actually creating authoritarian regimes. So that's the context of authoritarianism. As in, I just read a piece this morning that Poland also has been lost. The election in Poland also says that we're going to have a authoritarian regime there. So that's happening across, and the levels of authoritarianism that you see is varying. In US, you saw pretty much within a few days of Trump taking on, you saw the Muslim ban that he had started. And we have seen what's happening in Kashmir here. You go to Philippines, there you actually have a president. And it's quite, it's really a shame. A woman in his province was raped. And trust me, he said this, it's on record, that I was the mayor, I should have been the first one to get that opportunity. That person is the president of that country. That's the kind of leadership we see around. In that context, this title of this session itself is a classic oxymoron. If people know what oxymorons are, this is an absolute classic oxymoron for our world to, on the one hand, talk of strengthening participation, and on the other hand, you're looking at shrinking spaces. So I think that's really the critical question for all of us, that in this context, where the onslaught on not just civic spaces, the onslaught on democratic spaces, I would even say the idea of liberal democracy is under huge, huge pressure. How do you talk of actually participation?
I'm going to basically draw on two pieces of civic space research that we coordinate. One, of course, is the Civic Space Monitor, which Naomi referred to, but the other is the State of Civil Society report, which we bring out annually. So from the State of Civil Society report, which is SOCS for short, I think three things to really take note of in terms of global trends and the way that civil society is responding globally to civic space restrictions. One, of course, is the rise of authoritarian regimes, which has already been covered in quite a lot of detail. I'm not going to go there. The second, I think, which is important, is that nowhere else in history since the Second World War has the value of compassion and the relevance of humanitarian services been challenged as much as it is being now. And it's the first time for at least the generations who were born after the Second World War that you're actually seeing a backlash even against organizations that are providing fundamental life-saving services on the ground. That's never happened at this scale before, and I think that's something to take really seriously. But the silver lining in an otherwise very dark and gray cloud is that similarly, I think the rise in people power has also been unprecedented. And this is data for 2018. So in 2019, obviously, it's been phenomenal, especially from the last few months. So on one hand, you see the forces of closure, repression, authoritarianism increasing, but that does not mean that people are backing down. In fact, there is more and more organizing happening, especially in non-traditional spaces and outside of civil society, formal civil society organizations. The Civicus Monitor, the map that you saw, the colorful one in the presentation, it's available online. It provides a much more in-depth national and regional picture. So any country in the world, you can go up there and you can look at live updates of how civic space restrictions or progressions are happening in your own country. Again, we're in a situation where 111 countries have serious civic space restrictions. So they're in these three categories, which are obstructed, repressed, or closed. And there are very few countries which are actually in the open space or the narrowed space. But then again, I think to not just be all doom and gloom, there are several points of hope, but there are also several points of concern. So maybe the concerns first. On the concern areas, I think the types of repressions and the groups that are being most affected. The types of repressions, it's attacks on journalists and censorship. So censorship is preventing publics from accessing news from particular sites or, verifiable news. Internet shutdowns that you're seeing in a lot of continents, that's kind of the knee-jerk reaction. And then, of course, types of harassment. But in terms of the groups that are being affected, women's groups, by and large, are the largest number of reports that we get, and there are around 1,400 updates that inform the Civicus Monitor. Women's group being disproportionately affected by civic space restrictions, followed then by labor unions, trade unions, and then by groups that work on environmental issues as well as indigenous groups. And this differs by region, right? So in the Latin America and Caribbean, for instance, environmental activists are the most attacked, and the level of death, in fact, or life-threatening or life-taking attacks on environmental activists is highest, with, in fact, Guatemala and Colombia being at the top of that list. So having said that, there are also very, very strong indicators of where change has happened, Ethiopia being like the shining example right now, but there are more, and I can speak about that later. But there, I think the trend really is political change. So I think it's really important, again, for people to be voting into power leaders who are actually talking about civil society or civic space very concretely, and then to break that down, really, it's freedom of expression, association, and peaceful assembly. So really making sure at national and subnational levels that we're bringing in the leaders who kind of represent these values.
Como ustedes saben o conocen, Guatemala es un país multicultural, multiétnico y de diferentes etnias.
As you know that Guatemala is a multicultural country with a lot of expansion around it.
Y debido al incumplimiento de los deberes y las responsabilidades que tiene el Estado hacia la multietnicidad de los pueblos mayas en cuanto a los servicios públicos,
Due to inadequate and incomplete services on the society around the Mayas and the other societies in the Guatemala,
incluso es una realidad que se vive a diario.
I'm just including a reality which is happening day to day.
Guatemala a nivel nacional e internacional es considerado como un estado fallido
As this is a condition of the totally failed out there in the Guatemala,
porque es incapaz de cumplir con sus responsabilidades hacia los servicios públicos a las áreas más retiradas y rurales del país.
because the condition is too incompetent in the Guatemala. They cannot complete the basic services over there.
Debido a ese incumplimiento de parte del Estado es que varias organizaciones rurales de sociedad civil, mujeres y jóvenes
Due to this incompliment of the services, the rural society and the ladies and the kids, could not complete their better services.
se han manifestado de diferentes maneras, de diferentes expresiones y por los diferentes medios locales, departamentales, nacionales, para hacer escuchar su voz.
In order to raise their voices, they have been manifesting through various ways, through rights, through all the things which they can do in the society in order to make them aware about the corruption state of the country.
Ahora puedo hablar específicamente de la falla que se ha tenido en el sistema de salud, que por más de 40 años aproximadamente el Estado es un solo caso, que no ha reparado ninguna infraestructura en todos los servicios de salud a nivel nacional.
And I would wish to bring to your kind notice that something has happened in the recent time, which has not been happening in the last 40 years in Guatemala.
Y en algunos lugares no existe.
In the certain ways which even doesn't exist at all.
Por esa razón, los defensores han hecho escuchar su voz para reclamar, exigir a las autoridades que se cumpla su derecho a la salud.
In order to have the complete rights and complete it, in order to have the better services, the people have raised their voices so the authority can hear it and take action.
El Estado, en vez de resolver los problemas, está intimidando, acosando, asesinando y amenazando a los defensores de derechos humanos.
In order to complete it, the government is doing nothing. They're just literally threatening people, pulling them out and not hearing their voices in their favors.
Y las leyes, ya que todos, pues, los funcionarios son como una cadena, las leyes muchas veces es a favor de ellos y no a favor de las comunidades que defienden su derecho.
The law has been constructed in such a way that it only helps the government authorities and the people they have been suffering there.
I think most of the people got to know about Liberia when Madam Salif became president, and also with the Ebola outbreak, and then now with us having a war best being our president, football war best. So currently in Liberia have gone through a lot of changes that affected the way civil society engage with political powers. So before then there was civil crisis. We came into recovery phase and then into development. And in the process of entering the development phase, we had an epidemic outbreak. And after that epidemic outbreak, 2 years later, there was a political transition. And coming from a period where you have 12 years of leadership led by a political astute leader, and now having a transition that is led by someone that is not so politically savage. So there are, within the political space right now in Liberia, we have, there are many people that have come into leadership. They have not been into power position. There's fear. So that fear is more towards civic engagement because they know the power that civic engagement comes with. And as such, they are come into being new laws and policy that is sort of like shrinking that space that we initially operated in. With one being financial intelligence unit, something, and that is on money laundering. And that also affects how civil society actors have access to funding. And it also affects how will your registration be, your accreditation, re-accreditation. So all of those things affect civil society engagement in Liberia. And additionally, increased taxes on internet service. Right now, there was service we used to pay for like $29 per month, and now it has gone to $79. Yeah. So, because 2 months back, there were huge population movement that was mobilized through Facebook, and that cost the government a lot. And because of that, that was the first time we ever saw our internet being shut down. We were all introduced to VPN for the very first time. And I for one, took to social media, the Twitter, Facebook, and started to use VPN to have the message across. So it was the first of its kind. And coming from a situation, coming from a political leadership where you had kind of leverage, And now coming to a space where that leverage is being shrank is a bit worrying for civil society actors. They have been shut down of radio station. In Liberia, we use social media and radio. Community radios are one of the key means by which people get out information and mobilize people to take action that also have been affected. Like radio station, before they gather real lesson, there's issue if the government has problem with you, your lesson will not be issued, and after a while, they're going to come down and shut down your radio station. So those are things that are happening in Liberia that kind of affect the way civil society engage. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
And
Understanding the ground rules have become very difficult because not just the state that we are dealing with here. We are dealing with, and I wrote about this in a Carnegie report recently about the mobilization of the conservative civil society. And I think that's a factor that we have to really take into account, because now it's not just in TV studios that absolutely irrational and illogical people are sitting and shouting down any kind of progressive statement from anybody across the board. But it's there in the society. Like I said, I represent the Pakistan India People's Forum for Peace and Democracy, an organization's name my members are scared to take in states like Karnataka, West Bengal, probably except in a couple of states like Punjab or Kerala or don't talk about Maharashtra. We have not had a program there in a while. I just spoke to one of our colleagues from NCAS. She said, please come and have meetings in our premises. I said, yeah, we'll all get into trouble. But you can't even take the name of Pakistan, not just because there is a governmental ban on it, but because that's the extent to which the civil society intimidation and building it has happened. So I'm just placing this because this is a country where we have said that, we are one of the fastest growing economies. This is our local secret here for international friends, because this we often keep telling ourselves that we are the fastest growing economy and we are a tiger or whatnot and all that. So lion, I think. So, but we don't say this outside, but when there are people from other countries around, we say we are among the faster ones. But in reality, we are hitting the rock bottom of the GDP growth among all Asian countries, far below Sri Lanka, Pakistan, Nepal, Bangladesh, our neighbors. A scientifically tempered generation is completely driven into unscientific and irrational, illogical public existence. And that is actually the other side of the shrinking that's happening. Because when you're looking at, for example, urban middle class youth, your biggest challenge now in mobilizing is not just in the state curtailing things, but also there's this absolute irrational scientific stuff that is being getting spread. So just because a rule of law, justice system, and Amitabh mentioned some of this in the initial parts of it, because now we are a country that's fast getting mobocratic from being democratic. So you have a situation where you have had more than 300 odd episodes of mob attack, violence that has happened in the last 3 years alone on individuals for whatever, under the name of child trafficking, under the garb of cow slaughter, etc., etc. But in reality, it's actually becoming a mob lynching, mobocratic country where the state is actually a silent spectator. The state is not doing anything. Actually, technically speaking, they are not facilitating this either. But just because of the fact that there is a conservative, authoritarian, right-wing ruler who we say has 56-inch chest, then that enables all sorts of social hooliganism to be curtailing on civic spaces.
Having done, the State of Civil Society report for 8 years and the Civicus Monitor for several years as well, I think one of the biggest criticisms we got was we're always talking about the problem and there's no consistent research and analysis on what's actually working across countries. Over the last 3 years, there's actually been, Civicus has undertaken quite an extensive consultation with a lot of its stakeholders, including donors, but mostly civil society, to kind of pick up these instances. And there are 4 trends broadly that we've seen is working across locations. The first and foremost is really building legitimacy. And I cannot overstate the importance of every single civil society organization or actor building up that primary constituency or community that backs you and speaks up for you when something goes wrong. And I think that was one of the biggest challenges we thought existed to the current organized sector of civil society, is that somehow we have reached a stage where we're forgetting our roots, and there's a desperate need to go back and ensure that when you speak about your issues, you're not the solo kind of voice on chiming on that issue, but there's a group of supporters behind you.
Bueno, desde nuestra experiencia como defensores y defensoras de derechos humanos,
As from my point of view, as my organization does the work from society perspective,
como primer paso es que la ciudadanía conozca sus derechos. Y para poder ejercer sus derechos, ellos tienen también obligaciones de poder participar para la exigencia de sus derechos.
the first and most important step is to know the rights, and how to take these rights is the most important thing to know them as well.
Porque cuando visitamos las comunidades indígenas de las áreas rurales, ellos tienen mentalizado que los servicios públicos que brinda el Estado es un favor que les hace y no una obligación de parte del Estado para la búsqueda del bienestar de la población.
The most important point is to just understand that whatever services has been provided to them is their right to have it. It's not giving the gift to society, but just their right to have it in order to use it appropriately as well.
Y la ciudadanía, conociendo sus derechos como sus obligaciones, pueden ejercer una participación ciudadana activa en los espacios de toma de decisiones.
A society must take active decisions and participation in order to have the right set of society for the entire country.
De esa manera podemos organizarnos como ciudadanos que somos, conocemos cuáles son nuestras necesidades, nuestras problemáticas, y en los espacios de toma de decisiones podemos hacer nuestras propuestas para mejorar nuestras condiciones.
As being a citizen of the country, a first important thing is to understand situation, how to resolve the problems, and being a citizen of that country is most important. That is our obligation and is our part to have it in an appropriate way of having it.
Porque dentro del marco legal de mi país constituye de que dentro de la formulación de las políticas públicas, sociedad civil debe y tiene que tener participación para tener sus propuestas de solución de las problemáticas que tenemos.
The citizenship is the most important part for any country. In order to have the better understanding and solution, the citizens should have participation on a regular and active part so that they can bring the equality in the society for the entire country.
In Liberia, in the civic space, there have not been much health actors. Mainly, it have been political governance and other issues. But on the issue of health, there have not been much civic voices. So stepping into that arena had not been so easy. Oftentimes, you have to bring your chairs to the table because you won't be invited. Because, I mean, the health civic space have been so protective for the fact that people with technical backgrounds are the one around this discussion table. And if you do not have that technical background coming in, it's difficult. So, and we also see that there is a need to forge stronger solidarity.
Of getting results based on a certain veiled threat of popular perception that you can do on a government, then that's going to hit rock bottom. And that's exactly what happened. Now in 2019, 5 years after the Modi first government completed and the new election happened and they came back to power, another realization was that well, now there is not even remnants of any negotiation possible. Because we had an experience where the National Fish Workers Forum's leadership goes and meet the minister, and he says, now it doesn't matter because the fish workers will vote as Hindus. They will all vote as proud Hindus, and that was a statement that they will not vote as Dalits or fish workers or agriculture workers or farmers or any of those identities or workers in a factory, but they will vote as Hindus and Muslims and Sikhs and Parsis or whoever. So now that's the situation. So I'm just so building courage, confidence at a very, very personal level is something that we said we must undertake. Our activists, our community leaders, our friends, our movements have to have that confidence and courage. But along with that, also the depth of political knowledge.